Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where every smile is scrutinized and every gesture carries weight, a single moment of defiance would shake the very foundations of royal protocol. When the Welsh rugby team deliberately snubbed the Princess of Wales during what should have been a ceremonial handshake, nobody expected the quiet guard standing nearby to become the unlikely hero of a story that would captivate the world. What happened next wasn't just about rugby or royalty, it was about human dignity, silent solidarity, and how sometimes the most powerful statements are made without saying a single word. This is the true story of how palace staff, bound by centuries of tradition and sworn to silence, found their own way to stand up for someone they had come to deeply respect. In a world where social media explodes over every royal scandal, where palace intrigue makes front-page news, and where public opinion can shift faster than the changing of the guard, one woman's grace under pressure and her staff's unprecedented show of support would remind everyone that true nobility isn't about titles or bloodlines. It's about character when nobody thinks anyone is watching. But someone was always watching, and what they saw would change everything. The morning started like any other at Kensington Palace. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald brooch that had belonged to her late mother-in-law. The September sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the ornate carpet. Today was supposed to be a celebration. The Welsh rugby team had just secured their place in the World Cup finals, and as their patron, she would be presenting them with special commemorative medals. Margaret, her longtime lady-in-waiting, entered quietly with the day's schedule. At 62, Margaret had served the royal family for over 3 decades, and she could read the subtle signs of tension that others might miss. There was something in Catherine's posture, a slight stiffness in her shoulders, that suggested all was not well in the carefully choreographed world of royal duties. "Your Royal Highness, the rugby team has arrived at the palace," Margaret announced softly. "They're being shown to the blue drawing room as requested." Catherine nodded, but Margaret noticed she didn't meet her eyes in the mirror. The truth was, Catherine had been receiving increasingly hostile messages on social media about her role as patron of Welsh rugby. Some fans felt an English-born princess had no place representing Welsh sports, despite her genuine love for the game and years of dedicated service to Welsh causes. The criticism had grown particularly vicious after she had made a rare public statement supporting women's inclusion in traditionally male-dominated rugby clubs. Down in the servants' quarters, James Mitchell was preparing for his shift as one of the Queen's Guard stationed at ceremonial events. At 28, James had served in Afghanistan before joining the prestigious Guard unit. He understood duty, honor, and respect in ways that went beyond mere protocol. Today, he would be stationed in the blue drawing room, standing at attention while the princess conducted her official business. James had always admired Catherine's approach to her royal duties. Unlike some members of the family who seemed to go through the motions, she engaged genuinely with people. He had witnessed her comfort a crying child during a hospital visit, her fluent conversation with Welsh-speaking farmers at an agricultural fair, and her infectious laughter during school visits. To him, she embodied what modern royalty should be: approachable yet dignified, traditional yet progressive. The rugby team had arrived at the palace in a chartered bus, their mood celebratory but tinged with something else. Captain Rhys Evans, a stocky man with prematurely grey hair, had been fielding calls from certain Welsh independence groups all week. They had pressured him and his teammates to make a statement about English influence in Welsh affairs. The pressure had intensified when they learned their medal ceremony would be conducted by Catherine rather than a Welsh dignitary. "Remember what we discussed," Rhys murmured to his teammates as they walked through the palace corridors. "This isn't personal against her. It's about sending a message." Young Danny Williams, the team's newest member, at just 19, shifted uncomfortably. He had grown up admiring the princess's charitable work in Wales. His younger sister had been helped by one of Catherine's mental health initiatives after struggling with anxiety. The thought of snubbing someone who had genuinely helped his family felt wrong, but peer pressure and team loyalty were powerful forces. In the blue drawing room, palace staff made final preparations. The medals were arranged on a silver tray, each one specially commissioned with the Welsh dragon and the royal cipher. Photographer Sarah Chen positioned herself discreetly in the corner, ready to capture what should have been a celebratory moment for the official palace records. Catherine entered the room at precisely 2 p.m., her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She wore an elegant navy dress with subtle Welsh-inspired embroidery, a deliberate nod to the country she represented. James snapped to attention near the doorway, his red uniform immaculate, his expression neutral but observant. "Gentlemen, congratulations on your remarkable achievement," Catherine began, her voice warm and genuine. "Wales should be incredibly proud of your dedication and skill." What happened next would be replayed in slow motion in James's mind for months to come. As Catherine extended her hand to Captain Evans for the traditional greeting, he deliberately turned away, looking over her shoulder as if she didn't exist. One by one, the other team members followed suit, creating an invisible barrier between themselves and the princess. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the photographer's camera stopped clicking. Catherine's hand remained extended for a moment that felt like an eternity before she slowly lowered it, her composure intact, but her eyes betraying a flash of hurt that James caught from his position by the door. Margaret, standing nearby with the medal tray, felt her cheeks burn with indignation. In 30 years of royal service, she had never witnessed such deliberate disrespect. The protocols of royal interaction weren't just ceremonial niceties. They were acknowledgements of the institution and, by extension, the country itself. But Catherine, displaying the grace that had made her beloved by millions, simply continued with the ceremony as if nothing had happened. "I understand that strong feelings often accompany great achievements," she said, her voice steady. "Your medals represent not just your victories on the field, but your representation of Welsh excellence on the world stage." She began calling each player's name, placing their medal on the table, since handshaking was apparently off limits. James watched as she maintained perfect composure, her training in royal protocol serving her well, but he could see the subtle signs of distress, the way her left hand trembled almost imperceptibly, the slight pause before each name as she gathered herself. Young Danny Williams was the 7th player called. As he approached the table, he caught sight of Catherine's face close up for the first time. This wasn't the cold, calculating figure that the independence campaigners had painted her as. This was a woman doing her job with dignity despite being deliberately humiliated. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. "Respect is earned, but basic courtesy is owed to everyone." For a moment, Danny hesitated. His teammates were watching, the cameras were rolling. But as Catherine smiled at him with genuine warmth despite everything, he made a split-second decision that would set him apart from his teammates. He reached out and shook her hand firmly. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," he said clearly. "It's an honor to receive this from you." The collective intake of breath from his teammates was audible. Captain Evans shot him a look of betrayal, but Danny stood straighter, suddenly proud of his choice. Catherine's smile became radiant, and for just a moment, the tension in the room lifted. The ceremony continued with Catherine maintaining her professional demeanor, but James could see the toll it was taking. As a soldier, he recognized the signs of someone holding their position under fire. When the last medal had been placed and the team began to file out without a word of thanks, James made a decision that would change his life. As Catherine gathered her things, preparing to leave the room with whatever dignity she could salvage, James stepped slightly forward. It was a subtle movement, barely noticeable to most. But in the rigid world of royal protocol, it spoke volumes. He was positioning himself as a silent guardian, a witness to both the disrespect she had endured and the grace with which she had handled it. Margaret noticed immediately, as did Sarah, the photographer, who instinctively raised her camera. In that moment, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The staff present, Margaret, Sarah, 2 footmen, and the ceremonial guard, all seemed to stand a little straighter, their expressions hardening almost imperceptibly. Catherine paused at the doorway, perhaps sensing the change in energy. She turned back to look at the room where she had been so publicly humiliated, and her eyes met James's for just a fraction of a second. In that brief exchange, an understanding passed between them. She had not been alone in her ordeal, and she would not face its aftermath alone either. As she left the room, James remained at attention, but his mind was racing. He had witnessed something that went beyond royal protocol or sporting politics. He had seen a group of grown men deliberately attempt to humiliate a woman who had shown them nothing but respect and support. More than that, he had seen her respond with a dignity that shamed their pettiness. In the servants' quarters that evening, word of the rugby incident spread like wildfire. Palace staff formed a tight-knit community, and an insult to one of the royals they served was taken personally by many. But this felt different. This wasn't about protecting an institution or maintaining protocol. This was about standing up for someone who had been genuinely wronged. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the head housekeeper who had worked at the palace for 45 years, called an impromptu meeting in the staff dining hall. At 71, she commanded respect from everyone, from the newest kitchen assistant to the most senior private secretaries. "What happened today was unacceptable," she began, her Scottish accent thick with emotion. "Her Royal Highness has always treated us with respect and kindness. She remembers our names, asks about our families, and genuinely cares about our well-being. What those rugby players did was not just disrespectful to her position, it was cruel to her as a person. James found himself nodding along with the other staff members. He thought about all the times he had seen Catherine go out of her way to acknowledge the guards and staff. Her habit of saying good morning to everyone she passed, her genuine interest in their lives outside the palace walls. "So what do we do about it?" asked Thomas, one of the younger footmen. "We can't exactly make a public statement." Mrs. Patterson smiled, and there was steel in her expression. "No, we can't make a public statement. But there are other ways to show support, subtle ways that won't break protocol but will make our feelings clear." As the staff discussed possibilities, James found himself thinking about military traditions of honor and solidarity. In the army, when one of your own was under attack, you didn't abandon them. You stood together. The same principle could apply here, adapted to the unique constraints of royal service. By the end of the evening, a plan was beginning to form. It wouldn't be dramatic or obvious, but it would be unmistakable to those who knew how to look. The palace staff had decided to make a statement, and it would be delivered in the most British way possible, through subtle, persistent, and utterly proper acts of solidarity. James went to bed that night knowing that tomorrow would bring the beginning of something unprecedented in royal history. The Guard was about to stand firm, not just in ceremony and tradition, but in defense of someone who had shown them all what true nobility looked like. The next morning brought unprecedented activity in the usually quiet corridors of palace staff areas. Mrs. Patterson arrived at work 30 minutes early, her silver hair pinned more severely than usual, her expression determined. She had spent the night planning something that had never been attempted in the modern era of royal service, a coordinated show of support that would operate entirely within the bounds of protocol while making an unmistakable statement. James reported for his morning briefing to find the atmosphere among his fellow guards significantly different. Word of the rugby incident had spread beyond the immediate witnesses, and the reaction was uniformly one of outrage and solidarity. These were men and women who had sworn oaths to protect and serve the royal family. But more than that, they were human beings who recognized injustice when they saw it. Sergeant Major Bradley, a 30-year veteran of royal protection, addressed the morning assembly with unusual gravity. "Yesterday's events have been noted by all levels of palace administration," he began, his weathered face serious. "While we cannot and will not comment publicly on the behavior of visitors to the palace, we can certainly ensure that our own conduct reflects the highest standards of respect and professionalism." The message was clear to everyone present. They would continue to do their jobs impeccably, but their loyalty would be demonstrated in ways that went beyond mere duty. Meanwhile, Catherine began her day unaware of the underground movement building in her support. She had spent a restless night replaying the events of the previous day, wondering if she could have handled the situation differently. The morning newspapers had already picked up the story with varying degrees of accuracy and sensationalism. Some painted her as out of touch with Welsh sentiment, while others criticised the rugby team's behaviour. Her private secretary, Jonathan Heartfelt, briefed her on the media response over breakfast in her private dining room. A Cambridge graduate with 15 years of royal service, Jonathan had developed a protective instinct toward Catherine that went beyond professional duty. He had watched her navigate increasingly complex political and social challenges with grace, and yesterday's humiliation had stirred something in him that felt almost parental. "The Welsh Rugby Union has declined to comment officially," Jonathan reported, his voice carefully neutral. "However, there are reports that several former Welsh international players have privately expressed disapproval of yesterday's conduct." Catherine nodded, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "What about the scheduled visit to the Children's Hospital in Cardiff next week? Should we consider postponing?" "Absolutely not," Jonathan said firmly, surprising himself with his vehemence. "Your Royal Highness, you have never backed down from your commitments, and the children at that hospital are counting on your visit. We won't let the poor behaviour of a few individuals impact your service to others." At that moment, Margaret entered with the day's correspondence. Among the usual stack of official letters and invitations, she had deliberately placed a handwritten note from Danny Williams, the young rugby player who had shaken Catherine's hand. Margaret had intercepted it from the normal channels, recognising its potential importance. Catherine read the note aloud. "Your Royal Highness, I wanted to apologise for my teammates' behaviour yesterday. My grandmother always taught me that respect costs nothing but means everything. You have always represented Wales with honour, and you deserved better from us. I hope you will not judge all Welsh people by our poor example. Respectfully, Danny Williams." The simple sincerity of the letter brought tears to Catherine's eyes. Margaret watched her carefully, noting how this small act of decency seemed to lift the princess's spirits more than any official statement or media defense could have done. "Should I arrange for a reply?" Margaret asked. "Yes, please. A personal note, not an official response. Thank him for his courage in standing up for what's right, even when it wasn't easy." While Catherine dealt with her correspondence, the palace staff's plan was already in motion. It began with the smallest of gestures, James and his fellow guards standing with particular precision during Catherine's public appearances, their attention more focused, their presence more pronounced. To casual observers, nothing seemed different, but those familiar with royal protocol began to notice the subtle shift. Mrs. Patterson coordinated the effort with military precision. The housekeeping staff ensured that Catherine's private spaces were maintained to an even higher standard than usual, with fresh flowers appearing more frequently and her favorite tea always perfectly prepared. The kitchen staff, led by head chef Claude Bernot, began incorporating subtle nods to Welsh cuisine into the royal menus, a small but meaningful gesture of solidarity. The movement gained momentum when news of the palace staff's quiet rebellion reached other royal households. Staff at Windsor Castle, Sandringham, and Balmoral began their own shows of support, creating a network of solidarity that spanned the entire royal estate system. Lady Pemberton, Catherine's chief of staff, initially worried about the potential for protocol breaches. At 55, she had built her career on maintaining proper boundaries and procedures. However, after witnessing the Rugby incident firsthand, even she found herself swept up in the desire to support her employer in more meaningful ways. The turning point came during Catherine's first public appearance after the Rugby incident, a visit to a veterans' hospital in London. As her motorcade approached the hospital, James and 3 other guards who had volunteered for the assignment noticed something unusual. The normally small crowd of well-wishers had swelled to nearly 200 people, many carrying signs expressing support for the Princess of Wales. But it was what James observed among the hospital staff that truly moved him. As Catherine made her way through the wards, the nurses, doctors, and administrators seemed to stand a little straighter, applaud a little longer, and engage more warmly than usual. Word of her dignified response to the Rugby Snub had clearly spread, and people were responding with their own show of support. During her visit to the children's ward, Catherine knelt beside 7-year-old Emma Davies, who was recovering from surgery. The little girl looked up with bright eyes and said, "My mummy says you're very brave, Princess Catherine. She says some mean men were rude to you, but you were still nice to them." Catherine's eyes welled up as she hugged the child gently. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you could know." James, standing guard nearby, felt his chest tighten with emotion. This was why they were all fighting this quiet battle, not for an institution or a title, but for a person who brought genuine care and compassion to everything she did. The photograph of Catherine hugging little Anna would later become iconic, but at the moment it was taken, it simply felt like the most natural thing in the world. Sarah Chen, the palace photographer who had been present during the Rugby incident, captured the image with particular care, knowing instinctively that it would help tell the larger story of Catherine's character. That evening, the palace staff's informal network buzzed with reports from the hospital visit. Mrs. Patterson listened to the accounts with satisfaction, recognizing that their subtle campaign was having the desired effect. People were beginning to see past the headlines to the person at the center of the controversy, but the most significant development came from an unexpected source. William, the Prince of Wales, had been travelling in Scotland during the Rugby incident, and had only learned the full details upon his return. His reaction was swift and decisive. James was standing guard outside the prince's private office when he overheard a heated phone conversation. William's voice, usually measured and diplomatic, was sharp with anger as he spoke to someone who was clearly a high-ranking official in the Welsh Rugby Union. "The behaviour of your players toward my wife was disgraceful and unacceptable," William said, his words carrying the weight of royal authority. "She has served Wales faithfully for over a decade, and she deserved your respect regardless of any political differences you may have. I expect a formal apology, and I expect it today." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with William making it clear that there would be consequences for the Rugby Union's failure to maintain appropriate standards of conduct. When he emerged from his office, James noted the determined set of his jaw and the protective fire in his eyes. Word of William's intervention spread quickly through the palace staff network, adding another layer to their growing movement. The Prince of Wales was standing by his wife, and they were standing by both of them. Margaret found herself coordinating an increasingly complex web of support activities. She arranged for Catherine's schedule to include more events in Wales, demonstrating that the princess would not be intimidated or driven away from her duties. She also ensured that each public appearance was meticulously planned to showcase Catherine's genuine connection to the Welsh people. The breakthrough came 3 days after the rugby incident, during Catherine's visit to a primary school in Cardiff. James and his security team had prepared for possible protests, but instead they found hundreds of schoolchildren lined up along the street, waving Welsh and British flags with equal enthusiasm. Many carried handmade signs with messages like, "We love Princess Catherine," and "Thank you for helping Wales." As Catherine's car pulled up to the school, James noticed tears in her eyes as she took in the overwhelming display of support. The children began singing May Hen Vlad Fi Nahado, the Welsh national anthem, in their sweet, high voices, and even some of the adults in the crowd joined in. Inside the school, 8-year-old Sarah Morgan presented Catherine with a drawing of her wearing a Welsh daffodil crown, titled Our Princess. The little girl explained in Welsh that she had made it because her teacher said the princess needed to know that real Welsh people appreciated everything she did for their country. Catherine responded in fluent Welsh, thanking Sarah and promising to treasure the drawing always. The moment was captured on video by a local news crew, and within hours it was being shared thousands of times on social media, finally providing a counter-narrative to the negative coverage following the rugby incident. James watched from his position near the classroom door, as Catherine spent the next hour genuinely engaging with the children, helping with their art projects, reading stories, and answering their innocent questions about royal life. This was the woman they were all fighting to protect, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. As they prepared to leave the school, the headmistress, Mrs. Gwyneth Lewid, pulled Catherine aside for a private word. An older woman with grey hair and kind eyes, she had been teaching for 40 years and had seen many royal visits that felt perfunctory and staged. "Your Royal Highness," she said in lightly accented English, "I want you to know that what happened with the rugby team does not represent how most Welsh people feel about you. We see your work, we appreciate your respect for our culture and language, and we are proud to have you as our patron and princess." Catherine's composure finally cracked slightly, and she squeezed the older woman's hand gratefully. "Thank you. That means everything to me." As they drove back to London that evening, James reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. What had started as a moment of public humiliation had evolved into something much more significant. A movement of solidarity that crossed class lines, professional boundaries, and even national divisions. The palace staff's quiet rebellion was working, but more than that, it was revealing something beautiful about human nature. When good people witness injustice, they don't always need grand gestures or public statements to make a difference. Sometimes the most powerful responses come from countless small acts of kindness, respect, and support. Back at the palace, Mrs. Bond Patterson was already planning the next phase of their campaign. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to show that when someone stands firm in their principles, they don't stand alone. 2 weeks after the rugby incident, the palace staff's quiet revolution had evolved into something unprecedented in royal history. What had begun as individual acts of solidarity had grown into a coordinated campaign of support that operated entirely within the bounds of protocol, while making an unmistakable statement about loyalty, respect, and human decency. James had become an unofficial coordinator of the movement among the security staff. His military background made him naturally suited to organizing discreet operations, and his genuine respect for Catherine gave him the motivation to see their efforts through. He had established a network of communication that allowed staff across all royal residences to coordinate their actions, without leaving any paper trail or electronic record that might compromise their positions. The morning briefing in the guards' quarters had taken on a different tone since the incident. Sergeant Major Bradley, who had initially worried about maintaining proper boundaries, now found himself actively encouraging his men to go above and beyond in their visible support for the Princess of Wales. He had served under 3 monarchs and had never seen a member of the royal family inspire such genuine loyalty among the staff. "Gentlemen," Bradley addressed the assembled guards, "today Her Royal Highness will be attending the opening of a new wing at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Intelligence suggests there may be protesters present, not violent, but vocal. Our job remains the same, protection and security. But I trust you all understand that our presence should be particularly visible today." James nodded along with his colleagues. They all understood the subtext. Their job was to protect Catherine from physical harm, but they had expanded that mission to include protecting her dignity and demonstrating that she was not alone. Meanwhile, in the administrative offices, Margaret was coordinating what she privately called Operation Dignity. The name had come to her in the middle of the night, and it perfectly captured what they were trying to achieve. Every interaction Catherine had with palace staff was being orchestrated to demonstrate respect and support, from the way her tea was served to the precision with which her schedules were managed. Mrs. Patterson had recruited staff from across the entire royal household system. Word of their campaign had reached Balmoral, where the Scottish staff had begun their own shows of support. Even the groundskeepers at Sandringham had requested updates on Catherine's schedule so they could ensure her favourite flowers were prominently displayed whenever she visited. The breakthrough moment came during Catherine's visit to Great Ormond Street Hospital. As her motorcade approached the building, James could see a small group of protesters with signs criticising royal patronage of public institutions. There were perhaps 20 people, mostly middle-aged activists who regularly demonstrated against the monarchy. But they were vastly outnumbered by hospital staff, patients' families, and supporters who had gathered to welcome the princess. As Catherine stepped out of her car, something extraordinary happened. Every uniformed staff member present, from James and his fellow guards to the hospital security personnel, simultaneously came to attention. It wasn't planned or coordinated with the hospital. It was simply a spontaneous show of respect that rippled through the crowd like a wave. The protesters found their voices drowned out by applause from the hundreds of people who had gathered to witness the opening ceremony. Children pressed against the barriers, calling out "Princess Catherine" and waving homemade signs. Parents held up their phones to capture the moment, and even some of the protesters seemed taken aback by the overwhelming show of support. Inside the hospital, Catherine's genuine connection with the children immediately became apparent. She spent over an hour longer than scheduled, moving from bed to bed in the new pediatric ward, talking with young patients and their families. James watched from his position near the doorway as she comforted a mother whose 5-year-old son was facing his third surgery, her own eyes filling with tears as she listened to the woman's fears. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of pediatric cardiology, had been skeptical about the royal visit initially. She had seen too many celebrity appearances that felt hollow and performative. But within minutes of meeting Catherine, her opinion changed completely. "Your Royal Highness clearly understands the realities these families face," Dr. Mitchell later told the gathered media. She didn't just shake hands and move on. She sat with parents, she listened to their concerns, and she engaged with our young patients in a way that showed genuine care and understanding. The moment that would become the defining image of the day occurred when Catherine met 6-year-old Marcus Thompson, a little boy recovering from heart surgery. Marcus had been following the controversy about the rugby team in the simplified way that children process adult conflicts. He knew that some people had been mean to the princess, and he wanted to make her feel better. When Catherine approached his bedside, Marcus held out a crayon drawing he had made showing her wearing a superhero cape with the words, "Princess Catherine saves the day," written in shaky letters across the top. The image captured by the hospital photographer showed Catherine's face lighting up with genuine joy as she received this innocent gift. "You know what, Marcus?" Catherine said, kneeling beside his bed. "I think you're the real superhero here. You're so brave, and you're going to grow up to do amazing things." James felt his throat tighten as he watched the interaction. This was why they were all fighting this quiet battle. To protect and support someone who brought genuine light into dark places. The success of the hospital visit marked a turning point in public perception. The images and videos from the event dominated social media, showing Catherine's natural empathy and connection with people. The contrast with the cold indifference of the rugby team became even more stark, and public opinion began to shift decisively in her favour. But the palace staff's campaign was far from over. Mrs. Patterson had been monitoring social media and traditional news coverage, and she recognised that maintaining momentum would require sustained effort. She called another meeting in the staff dining hall, this time including representatives from all departments. "What we've accomplished so far has been remarkable," she began, addressing the assembled group of nearly 50 staff members. "But we need to understand that this is a long-term commitment. Supporting Her Royal Highness isn't just about responding to one incident. It's about demonstrating that when someone conducts themselves with dignity and grace, they deserve our respect and loyalty." Thomas, the young footman who had been among the first to join their efforts, raised his hand. "Mrs. Patterson, what about the upcoming state dinner? That would be a perfect opportunity to show international dignitaries how much we respect the princess." Mrs. Patterson smiled approvingly. The state dinner for the President of Ireland was indeed approaching, and it would provide an ideal showcase for their subtle but unmistakable show of support. Planning for the state dinner became a masterclass in coordinated excellence. Every aspect of the evening was designed to highlight Catherine's role and demonstrate the staff's dedication to her success. The floral arrangements incorporated Welsh daffodils alongside traditional roses. The menu featured dishes that celebrated both British and Irish traditions, and every service detail was executed with precision that went beyond mere professionalism. James was assigned to ceremonial duties for the evening, which meant he would be positioned prominently during the formal proceedings. He spent extra time ensuring his uniform was perfect, understanding that his appearance reflected not just his own standards, but the respect he wanted to show for Catherine. The evening of the state dinner, Catherine appeared radiant in an emerald green gown that paid tribute to Ireland, while showcasing her natural elegance. As she and William welcomed President Michael Higgins and his wife, the assembled staff watched with pride as their months of quiet support seemed to have contributed to her renewed confidence. During the formal dinner, something unprecedented occurred. As Catherine rose to give her speech welcoming the Irish delegation, every uniformed staff member present, from the ceremonial guards to the serving staff, stood at attention with particular precision. It was a gesture that went beyond normal protocol, and the international media representatives present immediately recognized its significance. Catherine's speech was masterful, weaving together themes of friendship between Britain and Ireland, the importance of cultural exchange, and the value of treating all people with dignity and respect. The subtle reference to recent events was not lost on anyone present, and the sustained applause that followed included enthusiastic participation from the palace staff. President Higgins, a man known for his eloquence and diplomatic skill, deviated from his prepared remarks during his response. "I must say," he began, his Irish accent lending warmth to his words, "it is clear that the Princess of Wales enjoys not only the respect of the Irish people, but the admiration of all who work with her. The dedication and pride evident among the palace staff this evening speaks volumes about the leadership and character of their Royal Highnesses." The comment prompted another round of applause, and James felt a surge of pride as he maintained his ceremonial position. Their quiet campaign had been noticed and acknowledged at the highest levels of international diplomacy. After the formal dinner concluded and the guests moved to the ballroom for dancing and conversation, Catherine made an unusual move. Instead of immediately joining the social portion of the evening, she took a few minutes to speak privately with key staff members, thanking them for their exceptional service. When she approached James, who was maintaining his post near the ballroom entrance, she paused and spoke quietly. "James, I want you to know that the dedication you and your colleagues have shown recently hasn't gone unnoticed. It means more to me than you could possibly imagine." James maintained his formal posture, but allowed himself a slight smile. "It's our honor to serve, Your Royal Highness. You make it easy for us to take pride in our work." The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it represented the culmination of months of quiet solidarity. Catherine had acknowledged their efforts, and they had demonstrated that respect and loyalty couldn't be demanded. They had to be earned through consistent actions and genuine character. As the evening wound down and the Irish delegation prepared to depart, President Higgins made a final observation to William and Catherine. "You know, I've attended many state functions around the world, and I can usually tell within minutes whether a leader has the genuine support of their people. Tonight, that support was unmistakable. It wasn't just protocol. It was pride." Later that evening, as James changed out of his ceremonial uniform, he reflected on how much had changed since that September afternoon when a group of rugby players had tried to humiliate the Princess of Wales. What they had intended as a moment of political theatre had instead revealed the strength of character that made Catherine worthy of the loyalty she inspired. The palace staff's quiet revolution had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but more importantly, it had demonstrated something profound about the nature of respect and dignity. When someone consistently treats others with kindness and consideration, when they bring genuine care to their responsibilities, and when they maintain grace under pressure, people notice. And when that person faces unfair treatment, those same people don't just stand by and watch. As word of the successful state dinner spread through the staff network, Mrs. Patterson began planning the next phase of their ongoing support campaign. Because they had learned that standing firm wasn't just about individual moments of courage, it was about sustained commitment to the values they believed in. 6 months after the rugby incident that had started it all, the impact of the palace staff's quiet revolution had rippled far beyond the walls of any royal residence. What had begun as a spontaneous show of support for Catherine had evolved into something much more significant, a redefinition of what loyalty and service meant in the modern era. James stood at attention in the same blue drawing room where the original snub had occurred, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Today, Catherine was hosting a reception for the Welsh Children's Charity Federation. an organization she had personally championed for over 5 years. The room buzzed with conversation as charity workers, volunteers, and young people who had benefited from various programs mingled with palace staff and dignitaries. The transformation in Catherine since those difficult September days was remarkable to witness. She moved through the room with renewed confidence, her natural warmth and enthusiasm for charitable work shining brighter than ever. James had watched her grow stronger over the months, supported not just by the palace staff's quiet campaign, but by the overwhelming response from the British public who had rallied to her defence. Mrs. Patterson, now 72 and officially retired, had been invited back to the palace for the reception as an honoured guest. Her leadership during the challenging period had earned her recognition from the highest levels of the royal household, though the true nature of her coordination efforts remained diplomatically unspoken. She watched with satisfaction as her successor, Mrs. Jennifer Hawthorne, maintained the same standards of excellence and loyalty that had become the hallmark of Catherine's household. The reception had particular significance because, among the guests, was Danny Williams, the young rugby player who had broken ranks to shake Catherine's hand during the infamous medal ceremony. Danny had since become something of a folk hero in Wales, his decision to show respect despite peer pressure resonating with people across the country. He had been invited to the reception in recognition of his work with a Cardiff youth rugby program that promoted sportsmanship and respect. When Catherine spotted Danny across the room, she made her way over to him with obvious pleasure. "I'm so glad you could join us today. I hear wonderful things about your work with the youth program." Danny, now 20 and more mature than the nervous teenager who had made that pivotal handshake, smiled broadly. "Your Royal Highness, it's an honor to be here. I have to say, watching how you handled that whole situation with my teammates taught me more about character than any coaching session ever could." Their conversation was overheard by several guests and media representatives present, and later that evening, Danny's words would be quoted widely as an example of how the original incident had ultimately become a teaching moment about courage and integrity. The most significant moment of the reception came when Catherine was introduced to 15-year-old Ceres Evans, a teenager from a disadvantaged area of Cardiff who had been helped by one of Catherine's mental health initiatives. Ceres had been struggling with severe anxiety and depression when she was referred to the program 2 years earlier. The support she received had literally saved her life, and she had gone on to become a peer counsellor helping other young people facing similar challenges.
"Your Royal Highness," Ceres said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "I wanted to thank you personally."
"When I was at my lowest point, your program gave me hope. But more than that, seeing how you handled those rugby players with such grace and dignity showed me that we don't have to respond to cruelty with cruelty. We can choose to be better." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she hugged the teenager. This was why all the struggle and controversy had been worth it, because their work was genuinely changing lives, one person at a time. James watched this interaction from his position near the doorway, and he felt a deep sense of pride in what they had all accomplished together. The palace staff's campaign of support had not just protected Catherine during a difficult period, it had helped preserve and strengthen programs that were making real differences in people's lives. The success of their quiet revolution had not gone unnoticed at the highest levels of government and society. Several members of Parliament had privately commended the palace's handling of the rugby controversy, noting how it had been resolved without official complaints or diplomatic incidents. The subtle but effective response had become a case study in crisis management taught at several universities. Margaret, now promoted to senior lady-in-waiting, had documented the lessons learned during those challenging months. Her private report, shared only with senior palace officials, outlined how authentic leadership and genuine staff loyalty could overcome external criticism and political pressure. The document had become required reading for all new members of the royal household staff. But perhaps the most significant change had occurred within the palace staff community itself. The shared experience of standing together in support of their principles had created bonds that went beyond professional relationships. They had discovered that when people unite behind something they believe in, they can achieve far more than any individual effort could accomplish. The afternoon reception concluded with Catherine delivering remarks that subtly but clearly referenced the events of the previous year. "I've learned over the past months that respect is indeed a two-way street," she said, looking directly at several staff members as she spoke. "The dedication and loyalty I've received from so many people, from palace colleagues to charity volunteers to young people like Ceres, has reminded me that when we treat each other with dignity and kindness, we create communities where everyone can thrive." The sustained applause that followed included enthusiastic participation from every staff member present, and James felt that familiar surge of pride in being part of something larger than himself. As guests began to depart, an unexpected visitor appeared at the reception, Captain Rhys Evans. The rugby team captain who had led the original snub requested a private audience with Catherine. He had come alone, without fanfare or media attention, carrying himself with the bearing of a man who had spent months reflecting on his actions. James positioned himself discreetly nearby as Catherine agreed to speak with Evans in a quiet corner of the room. The rugby captain looked significantly older than he had 6 months earlier, his face showing the strain of months of criticism and internal conflict. "Your Royal Highness," Evans began, his Welsh accent thick with emotion, "I've come to apologize for my behavior and that of my teammates. What we did was inexcusable, and it has weighed on me every day since. I let politics and pressure from others override basic human decency, and I'm deeply ashamed." Catherine listened with the same grace she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. "Captain Evans, I appreciate you coming here today. It takes courage to acknowledge when we've made mistakes. I've watched how you responded to our disrespect," Evans continued, "and I've seen the work you do for Wales and for people everywhere. You deserve better from us, and I want you to know that not all Welsh people supported what we did. Many of us have great respect for what you represent." The apology was genuine and heartfelt, and Catherine accepted it with characteristic dignity. "Thank you, Rhys. I hope we can all move forward from this experience, having learned something valuable about the importance of treating each other with respect." As Evans left the palace that evening, several media outlets captured images of his departure. His decision to apologize publicly would make headlines the next day, finally bringing formal closure to the controversy that had dominated discussions about royal protocol and public respect. Later that evening, as the palace returned to its normal routine, James found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had all experienced. The rugby snub had been intended to diminish Catherine and make a political statement about Welsh independence and English influence. Instead, it had revealed her true character and inspired a movement of solidarity that had strengthened both her position and the institution she represented.
Mrs. Bennet did.
Patterson, preparing to finally return to her retirement, gathered the senior staff for a final informal meeting in the kitchen where so many of their plans had been hatched. The room was filled with people who had become not just colleagues but co-conspirators in a campaign that had redefined what service and loyalty meant. "What we accomplished over these past months," she said, looking around at the assembled group, "wasn't just about protecting one person or defending the monarchy. We demonstrated that when good people see injustice, they don't have to accept it silently. We can respond with dignity, persistence, and unity." Thomas, the young footman who had been among the first to join their efforts, raised his hand. "Mrs. Patterson, do you think we really made a difference?" The older woman smiled, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "Thomas, look around this room. Look at the pride in your colleagues' faces. Think about the young people whose lives have been changed by the programs we help protect. Consider the example we've set for how to respond to adversity with grace and determination." I'd say we made quite a difference indeed. As the meeting dispersed and staff members returned to their duties or headed home to their families, James took a final walk through the blue drawing room where it had all begun. The space looked exactly as it always had. Elegant, formal, steeped in centuries of tradition, but for him it would forever be marked as the place where he had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature in the span of a single afternoon. The rugby team's attempt to humiliate Catherine had backfired spectacularly, not because of any grand gestures or official responses, but because it had revealed the depth of respect and loyalty she had earned through years of genuine service and authentic caring. The palace staff's quiet revolution had succeeded because it was built on real relationships and shared values rather than protocol or obligation. Months later, when new staff members joined the royal household, they would hear the story of the rugby incident and its aftermath. It would become part of the palace's unofficial history, a reminder that standing firm for what's right doesn't always require dramatic gestures or public declarations. Sometimes the most powerful statements are made through consistent acts of loyalty, respect, and quiet dignity. The Guard had indeed stood firm, not just in ceremonial tradition, but in defense of the values that made their service meaningful. And in doing so, they had proven that when someone earns your respect through their actions and character, defending that person becomes not just a duty, but a privilege. Catherine continued her royal duties with renewed confidence and purpose, knowing that she had not just survived a public challenge, but had emerged stronger and more supported than ever before. The young people helped by her charitable programs, The staff members who had rallied to her defense, and the millions of people who had watched her handle adversity with grace, had all been reminded that true nobility lies not in titles or positions, but in how we treat each other when the cameras aren't rolling and nobody thinks anyone is watching. But someone is always watching. And what they saw during those crucial months was a masterclass in how to turn a moment of intended humiliation into a demonstration of character, community, and the enduring power of standing together for what's right.